ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. Hearty welcome to Jnanarjane, Empowering Excellence. Friends, today's Wednesday study circle, we have selected very interesting and most apt topic for the day, taxation on capital gain. A quick reference. Friends, unfortunately, the speaker we have fixed had some emergency. That's why he couldn't join. But we are really fortunate to have two young members accepted our invite and a very short notice agreed to share their knowledge on capital gain taxation. CA Chirag Solanki and CA Kiran A joined with us. On behalf of Bangalore branch and on behalf of all the participants here, hearty welcome to CA Kiran Solanki. Hearty welcome, Kiran.
Sir.
On behalf of Bangalore branch and on behalf of all the participants here, hearty welcome to CA Kiran A. Hearty welcome, Kiran.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Friends, you are the reason for this program. Every Wednesday study circle, a lot of people waiting for Bangalore branch program. That is the reason week after week we conduct this study circle meet. So where we are selecting very interesting topic, very relevant topic for the month or a week. So today now the taxation, IT return filing, all are happening. We thought it capital gain taxation is an important topic. Let us understand in detail so that we can give the best service to our clients and make the right calculation, pay the right tax. That is the reason we organize this program. So your interest made us to organize this. Hearty welcome to each one of you. Let me take a minute of yours to inform some of the important issues of Bangalore branch. That is, so next month, 26th and 27th, we have planned NGO NPO 2 days conference. It is a hybrid mode, 2 days conference. So I request all of you to register for that program. It is a 2 days conference, both on physical and virtual available. So please visit bangaloreici.org. NGO and NPO, lot of changes. Renewal of that is there, and even IT return filing, lot of changes are. So many developments in NGO and NPO practice. So a good governance is required. A good advice also is required from chartered accountants. Many NGOs are not doing it properly. Things are changing. Department is looking into NGOs in deeper sense. So that is the reason we organized in detail study for 2 days of learning of 12 hours on NGO and NPO. So I request all of you to visit bangaloreici.org and register for that program. And one more important issue, I want to request all of you to contribute for Chartered Accountants Benevolent Fund. This is the only fund created by ICAI for the benefit of chartered accountants and its members. Good number of members suffered during COVID, and majority of them claimed amount from the ICAI Chartered Accountants Benevolent Fund. Friends, normally the interest earned on the corpus spent on this welfare scheme. However, this year the number of claims gone up too many. That is the reason ICAI is spending out of the corpus itself. That is the reason President made a request to all the branches to make a request to all the members to contribute towards that. As a life member, 10,000 rupees is a life membership, friends. So it is a noble cause, because no one knows who gets that benefit. No one. So I always wish that our members should not require that support. However, it is in God's hand. Many people required that support. Many young members also passed away, and their dependents required that support. Sometimes members dependents also find it difficult. Members find it difficult to take care of their hospitalization expenses. In such situation also, the fund helps. Good number. In case of Bangalore, I only recommended several applications for that request. Across India, the number is too high. In that regard, we made in our website an appeal to contribute for that thing. So you are going to get ATG certificate for your contribution. So I request please make at least a minimum of 10,000 as a life member. I think in Bangalore less than 5% members are life members of CABF. We can increase another 5% at least in this year. I request each one of you to look into that and make 10,000 rupees contribution or more than that. Even smaller amount also okay. Even 500,000 also okay to contribute. But I request 10,000 rupees you make one life member makes a lot of difference, friends, for the needy. It's a contribution for our own fraternity. With that note, once again, hearty welcome to each one of you. Over to Divya.
Thank you, Chairman. A very pleasant good evening to all the participants and to both the speakers of today's program. To give a brief introduction about Mr. Chirag, he completed his articleship with Suresh & Co. and is continued to work in Suresh & Co. And he is handling HNI taxation division, serving HNIs across the globe. He contributed various articles at his firm, magazine Spotted and Reported. He's speaking arrow on HNI taxation, capital gains, and many other services. With this brief introduction, I welcome you wholeheartedly, Mr. Chirag, for today's program. Hearty welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Divya.
Over to you. Over to you.
We also have Kiran. Hearty welcome, Kiran, once again. Yeah,
Yes,
over
sir.
to Chirag.
Thank you. So, first of all, I would like to understand if my voice is audible and the video is clear.
Yes,
Yeah,
video
yes,
active
sorry.
to come.
Okay.
Clear. Yes, your PPT is also visible.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So, happy afternoon, happy evening, everyone. So, on a very short notice, I've been asked to prepare on capital gains taxation, and I understand the topic earlier was something else. But then I wanted to become comfortable in topic which is more suitable to me. So I chose capital gains taxation, a quick referencer. So the overall layout of this entire 2 hour session would be that we would run through some of the provisions which we know day to day, but there might be something small which we may have, missed by oversight, or something which is new to the capital gains taxation recently, because the law is evolving a lot and there have been recent changes in the field. There have been a lot of changes in the capital gains definition as well. And this law, since drafted from 1961 till now, it's more than 60 plus years now. It has evolved over a great differences and great things which have come up. So as we proceed further, there may be something new which we would be able to take away from session. So with that, I'll start with my session. And feel free to ask questions anywhere. I would be able to look at the questionnaire panel at the end of every three slides, and then we'd be make sure to answer to the best extent possible. And thanks to Kiran sir, who's here to guide me for any of the questions where I stumble upon. Okay, so with that, I move on to my first slide. So capital gains taxation, when we come to the definition, is quite straightforward. Two things are the ones which qualifies for capital gains taxation. One, it should be a capital asset. Second, it should trigger a transfer. So capital asset has its own definition under Section 2 of the Income Tax Act, and the transfer has been broadly said as anything which is not other than Section 47. So Section 47 talks about transactions which are not regarded as transfer. So if it doesn't fall under that category, then there is a high chances of, not just high, it is definite that it would fall under capital gains, and we need to see whether how the tax treatment is, whether there's any tax exemption, whether there is any rebate, or what is the tax, how is the tax calculated at, and how is the net taxable capital gains arrived at. So again, coming to two things. First is it should be a capital asset. Second is it should trigger a transfer. So if it is not satisfying either one of it, it would not be a capital gains at all. It can be a capital asset, but it may not be a transfer because of the inclusion in Section 47. Then such transactions are not regarded as capital gains at all. Okay, and capital asset is quite a definition which, although is the definition has evolved from a long long past what was the initially drafted. But then there have been recent changes which we have been hearing, something called as Bitcoins, cryptocurrencies, and something called as NFT, that is non-fungible tokens. These are bringing in new challenges to the tax regime, wherein we need to understand as to whether does it fall under capital asset, and if it falls under capital asset, what would be the tax treatment? Because there are quite straightforward thumb rules given for tax treatment. So that is where we need to look at is whether it is a capital asset and whether it triggers a transfer. So what is capital asset? So the section clearly specifies under section 2 saying that capital asset is any kind of property held by the assessee, whether or not relating to business or profession. Then agricultural land in India, which means to say that they are trying to exclude agricultural lands, which has its own criteria of definitions, which is up to 2 kilometers, less than 10,000 of population, up to 6 kilometers, less than 1 lakh of population, up to 8 kilometers, less than 1 lakh of 10 lakh of population. When I mean to up to so and so kilometer, I mean from the local limits of the municipal, which for Bangalore would be BBMP, and for other cities it would be other cities and the districts it would be based on the BBMP limit, means the local jurisdiction limits. Then any stock in trade, consumables, stores are raw materials held for the purpose of business. These are not considered. These are not included as capital assets. So the first definition are properties of any kind held in by the assessee. Then any urban agricultural land, and then it excludes certain things. What are those things? That is stock in trade, stocks used for my business purpose. Like motor car used by a car dealer, jewelry by a jewelry merchant, and so on. Personal effects. Now, when it comes to personal effects, there's a thin line of difference between whether that goes into a capital gains or no. But then again, the Act has clearly specified that only these 6 items are going to be included as capital asset. So what are those 6 items? Jewelry, archaeological collections, drawings, paintings, sculptures, and any kind of art. So again, the question comes back is whether my cryptocurrencies that I buy and sell are the non-fungible tokens which are quite becoming gaining the attention of the town, whether those will fall under the definition of capital assets. Although the answer by looking at the Act looks like a clear no, but there have been several instances wherein CBDT chairman has himself said that such items or such assets shall be classified as capital assets. So this is on the basis of just the discussion made by the CBDT chairman, is where this entire idea that cryptocurrencies and NFTs, these are also a part of capital assets, and accordingly capital gains shall arise. Although still the law has not been very clear in defining it, but still based on this very liberal understanding, we are able to define it as a capital asset and accordingly charge capital gains tax on it.
So just to add on to what Chirag mentioned about the agricultural land, so it's very important that how we maintain the records. Sometimes example, say when we have the agricultural land, normally we get that RTC from the local municipality, taluk office somewhere. So there normally they mention that whether it's agricultural land, what crop we used to crop that. Then also we need to look into sometimes what happens, we simply go with the how the kilometers, that 2 kilometer, 10 kilometer, based on what they decide. So we may have to get the certificate from the local municipality that how long that where is the land situated. That certificate we have to get. And also one more thing, whether we are declaring agricultural income in the tax return. So that is mandatory. If you have the agricultural land, if you don't declare agricultural income if in the previous years, to proving that it's agriculture and it's exempt, that will be a problem.
Yes. Also, the way the questions asked by tax department specifically for agriculture income is such that they are trying to look at the yield, they are trying to look at RTC, they are trying to look at what is the agriculture income being done by the nearby areas, and they are trying to do a retrospective comparative analysis, and whether trying to see whether that agriculture income actually exists, or is it exists, or whether is it just for the sake of declaring. There are many questions which are more from scientific perspective, which requires a lot of digging, not just into the soil, but even into the documentation. So to prove that agriculture income actually exists. So it has become little challenging, but still, as the technology develops and as the law develops, it will become smoother. So first we spoke about capital assets. Then now we are trying to see what is transfer. Transfer in relation to a capital asset would say change, exchange, relinquishment, extinguishment of any right. This is very common nowadays that people are selling rights, are endorsing rights to another of a property which is still not completely vested to them. So these also attract capital gains. We need to be careful on this point, wherein the right, once the right is transferred, it triggers the capital gains if it is a capital asset. There are many instances, for example, shares which are yet to be allotted, like right shares, and property which is under construction. So it's not completely vested to you, but you are endorsing your right to another person. That is where the capital gains trigger. So these kind of definitions are very important. So apart from that, there's section 47, which talks about various transactions which are not considered as transfer for the purpose of capital gains, which would include merger, demerger, and spin-off, retirement of partnership, and all that. So there are it's a very brief section, a very broad and very crisp section, which has its own conditions and criteria based on which you trigger as whether it's you classify and trigger whether it triggers the capital gains or not. So even barter attracts transfer. Why have we brought in here is because nowadays the transactions are more beyond just in terms of money. People are exchanging one good for another good. So does it attract capital gains or not? It is very essential to look at. For example, now a person is buying something for in exchange of Bitcoin. So that attracts capital gains. That instills capital gain, or someone is giving up its shares for the purpose of getting some rights in some other company. So even that kind of transaction attracts capital gains. So we need to see whether it triggers under comes under the term transfer or not. Then this is just a briefly giving a period of holding. What are the period of holding? Basically for listed shares, listed securities is what I would call it. It is 1 year. For anything other than that, it is 2 years mainly. Like for example, immovable property, unlisted shares fall under the 2-year category, and anything which pertains to debenture or unlisted securities other than shares, which are not listed or so, which falls in the 3 years. Then how do we arrive at capital gains? So we look at sale consideration. There also we have certain provisions, that is section 43CA, section 50C and all. And then we look at whether expenses are related to sale. It should be purely in connection to transfer expenses. So after that, we arrive at net sale consideration, which is one of the important criteria for even section 54F and various other exemption sections, that net sale consideration. Then cost of constructions and indexation wherever it is more than, wherever it is classified as 1 year, beyond the short term, that is long term. Cost of improvements and capital gains. Then we arrive at capital gains, declassifying it whether it is short term or long term. So one thing which I wanted to bring in is expenses relating to sales. So we have this people nowadays, that is high net worth clients, are highly investing in PMS services because they are giving good returns. But then in return for the good returns which PMS services give, they are charging some portfolio management expenses. So there has been a standard question as to whether these many of the tax authorities was that it is not allowed. But then there's something interesting from Bangalore IT80, wherein in case of Madam Sudha Murthy, it is said that the expenses incurred on PMS is allowed as expenditure while arriving for capital gains purpose. So this is something very interesting, that PMS expenses now can be claimed as expenses while arriving at net sale consideration for capital gains. This gives a relief because that expense is allowed as a deduction from my capital for the calculating capital gains. So this is something recently announced in 2020, which is announced by Bangalore IT80 in case of Sudha Murthy Madam. And this gives it a big relief to people who get returns from PMS, but were not allowed, but the deduction of the PMS expenses is not allowed as deduction earlier, which is now allowed.
Just to add on, however, it's still we can say that it's a gray area whether we can consider this as a deduction or not. But what happens if we don't claim it, and if at all, if in future, if they accept it, yes, we can claim it. If we don't claim it in the earlier years, we may lose that. So better if we can claim it now based on this case law, and in future, if at all, if it is a reverse, then I don't think there will be any penalty. So better we can go with this claiming deduction for this PMS expenses.
Yes. Then coming to exemptions, these are the 54 series exemptions which are there from long. And these exemptions I'll just quickly run through. Although we are all well versed with this and we use these exemptions very frequently. 54 is for the residential house property where a person sells. This is applicable only for individual and HUF, wherein the person sells the house property, land or building, and buys another residential house property. And it should be a long-term capital gains. And there are some certain conditions. For example, it should be the investment in the new house property should be made within 3 years from the date of transfer. 3 years in case of construction, 2 years in case of purchase. And if it is being the sale is happening after a purchase of any one property which is done just 1 year prior, then that also can be considered for the purpose of 54 exemption. However, there comes a withholding period. That it means to say that you cannot sell that house property, the new house property that you have purchased, within a period of 3 years from the date of purchase or completion of construction. It is not from the date of which the capital gains has actually incurred, but from the date of completion or purchase. So this is something which we need to take into account. Then there is section 54B, which is for urban agricultural lands, and for which again if you are making the amount of investment is capital gains, then you are able to claim a deduction for the amount invested. And the period for this is 2 years from the date of transfer. So you have time limit to invest in the agriculture land for a period of 2 years. And again, for that, there's a withholding period, which means to say that it is restricted from selling it for 3 years. And wherein you sell it within the period of 3 years, the capital gains again incurs in the year in which you have sold the new asset bought. Then 54 EC is one of the sections wherein you are selling land or building or anything else, and you are able to claim exemption on the up to 50 lakhs by investing in REC bonds, rural electrification bonds and all. So these have to be invested within 6 months from the date of transaction, and it is in a lock-in period for 5 years now, and this comes with a maximum limit of 50 lakhs. Then there's the next section of 54F, which is quite frequently used for startups, wherein they sell the shares for which, and then they plan to buy a residential house property. But here there are certain additional conditions apart from the withholding period, which is that they should not hold more than one house property on the date of sale. And they should retain the asset for a period of 3 years in case of purchase and 3 years in case of construction. Then there is one more new section brought in, that is 54GB, wherein you sell a residential house property and invest the proceeds from the residential house property into a recognized startup, which is a startup recognized by the DPIIT, and you get an exemption for the amount net sale invested. But here also there are certain conditions that the investment should be there for 5 years, as in you should hold the shares of the recognized startup for a period of 5 years, and this investment has to be done before the return filing due date, and should not be used, and the money should not be used by the startup for purchasing any of the assets which do not add value addition to the company. For example, investing in real estates, investing in cars, jets, air jets, etc. So this is something which is brought in new and is being explored by various angel investors who are trying to look for investment in startups. So coming to financial instruments, 5 financial instruments, because that is where the major capital gains transaction happen in terms of income taxation. So financial instruments are contracts wherein you exchange interest, you create interest or settle a transaction. And there are various kind of financial instruments now, which could be derivative instruments, equity-based, debenture-based. Now, there are certain new additions also to these kind of financial instruments like cryptocurrencies and NFTs, which are popularly being explored by the young crowd. And Bitcoin is something which is not being cleared, wherein the papers are still on the table as to whether how to classify such transactions. But as I said again at the start of the discussion, that this cryptocurrencies will, as per the CBDT chairman, it is a asset. So we are taking it as capital asset, and taxation is accordingly being treated for that. So in case of cryptocurrencies, if it is a short-term asset, that means to say that it is being held for less than 3 years and has been sold within a period of 3 years. And the taxation for that would be at the slab rates because it doesn't fall under the section 111A. And in case it is a long term, which means to say that you have held the cryptocurrencies for more than 3 years, then it will be taxed at 20%, which is under section 112. Same goes for non-fungible tokens, which is NFTs, which are being quite frequently coming in news right now and have gained a good momentum, wherein you are able to digitally sell some property on a digital medium. And for that, there's an auction, there's a market available for that. And those are also taxed just as as cryptocurrencies. Okay. So taxability by non-resident, mainly this taxability comes in because non-residents are quite frequently exploring options to invest in India. And there should be a special consideration for them because they would be facing double taxation in India as well as overseas. So when it comes to non-resident taxation, we have a specific set of sections under chapter 12A, which is section 115C to 115I, wherein it has given quite a broad taxation for non-residents specifically. So one of the case could be that a non-resident is a holder of equity shares in Indian company and he is transferring the shares. So in that case, what would be the taxation? Generally, if we go by the normal provisions, we would have arrived at section 112 in case it is non-listed and 112 in case it was a listed company. But then there would be varied taxation, which is could be 20% in case of unlisted companies and 10% in case of listed companies. But then by introduction of this section 115C, it has been brought in that the maximum tax limit would be at 10%. So this is something which a non-resident in India can explore for. Then another would be an individual being resident of US receives a property outside India. There, because it is property, it has been specified that only in case of shares you get the benefits of 115C to 159. But in case of a property, it is taxed just as like it was in India. So it would be at 20% in case of long term and at slab rates in case it was a short term. So I'll just take few questions which might be there here. So Hari Krishnan sir says that if an assessee has sold a property and has capital gains, but within short time expires, can the leaguer hire reinvest the gain amount in his name and claim exemption? What if there is no will and family settlement is okay? Family settlement is not made with regard to utilization. Ken sir, would you like to answer this?
Yes, Chirag.
Yeah. So the question is, if an assessee has sold a property and has capital gains, but within short time expires. So I presume the assessee who has incurred capital gains has expired. Can can the legal hire reinvest the gain amount in his name and claim exemption? What if there is no will and family settlement is not made with regard to utilization of the fund?
It looks like it's a gray area, because what happens the moment there is a inheritance or something, if the original owner has not made any will or any family settlement, so there is no transfer of rights or legal heir or someone, if there is no transfer. But sometimes what we used to do, we can create such kind of thing that we have to go for court. We have to prove that we are the legal heir for the assessee. So I should get this kind of so and so. Then yes, we can do this further reinvestment or something and to get the exemptions.
Yes. Okay. So second question is from Raviraj Shinoy. For shares listed on Nasdaq Stock Exchange, is it eligible for 55(2) AC, which is grandfathering, fair market value as on 31 January 2018? So 55(2) AC is used for section 112A, which clearly specifies listed securities, and listed securities are securities in India. So Nasdaq stocks would not be eligible, as there's no, they do not satisfy the conditions laid out under 112A, and 55(2) AC is specifically for Indian Stock Exchange, securities listed in Indian Stock Exchange. Mr. Prahlad R has another question. A basic question: can we claim exemption under more than one section, say 54 EC and 54F? Yes, you can claim, provided you are able to claim, you are able to substantiate that 54 EC is up to 50 lakhs and 54F is based on the proportional, that is net sale consideration by the total capital gains incurred. So as long as that is there, you will be able to claim more than one section. So continuing with non-resident taxation. India has entered into various DTAA agreements with several countries, but then when it comes to capital gains taxation, there have been certain litigations as well, saying that whatever the capital gains incurred by the non-resident is from an Indian company, so the tax has to be paid in India. So now there is a situation wherein there could be no article for capital gains in DTAA, although the articles wherever they are not there are being developed. So as per the treaty, then what happens is then ultimately we go through the basic rule wherein the non-resident shall pay tax in the source country and claim the tax credit for whatever tax he has paid in the source country. So since here we are talking about India, the source country would be India. So he would pay taxes in India and claim that same tax credit for in his country of residence while he is filing his tax returns in that respective country. However, there are certain cases wherein, for example, in UK, the taxation doesn't trigger in UK until the money is brought in or repatriated to UK. So in such cases, it has to be determined whether he will be able to claim the credit based on the timing of the repatriation. So generally, there's a certain time limit within which you need to claim the tax credit. For example, in many countries, it is 5 years, and in a few of the developed countries, it is 3 years. So you need to plan in such a way that if you are paid taxes here and are planning to repatriate in future, you are able to do it within the time frame allowed for tax credit claiming, or else this tax credit gets void. So this is overall summarizing as to how the capital asset holding period is determined at and what is the quick tax rates. So in case of listed securities, it is under 112A, which is taxed at 10%. Then in case of it is a short-term capital gains, it is taxed at 15%. And unlisted equities, preference shares, and immovable properties, for them the holding period is 24 months less or 24 months more. So if it is less than 24 months, it is going under short-term capital gains, for which the taxation is done as per the slab rates of the assessee. And in case it is more than 24 months, the taxation is at 20%. There are certain then there are debt-oriented mutual funds and other assets, for which it is 36 months. If it's more than 36 months, it is under long-term capital asset, for which the taxation is at 20% with indexation benefit. And in case of it is less than 36 months, the taxation is determined as short-term capital gains, for which the capital gains is at slab rates. So just before I move on to next slide, I just want to again reiterate that I was given a very short period to prepare for the session. So in case there is anything which you want to share, you can just let me know at the end of the session, and I'll definitely look into it for the next time. So now, after talking about various capital gains transactions, we have broadly discussed this. Now there are some special cases which we want to bring in based on our frequent practices, which we have, wherein we have encountered various cases with our clients, and we want to share a few of the experiences here. So first one would be the ULIP taxation, which is recently amended with Finance Act 2021. What is it brought in is that whichever ULIPs do not fall under section 1010D. Basically, these are high premium ULIPs wherein the premium is exceeding 2.5 lakhs. So in such cases, so whichever ULIP is issued after the introduction of Finance Act, that is 1st February 2021, then those and the premium for that is high, that is about 2.5 lakhs. For that, you will not be able to get the exemption under section 1010D, and whatever is the maturity proceeds that you will get at the end of the tenure would attract capital gains under the provisions of that. Now, since these mutual funds, these ULIPs would not have STT suffered, so these would fall under the normal slab rates, or if it is a short-term capital gains, and if it is a long-term capital gains, it would be attracting 20% of tax. So this is broadly how we are classifying it. If the ULIP, whether 1010D applies to it and is exempt. If yes, then it doesn't cover under section 214, which is attracting for capital gains. If not, then we have to see whether because of fourth provision or fifth provision of the section 1010D, it is being covered. If no, then section 214C is not applicable. And if yes, then section 2(14)(c) is applicable, meaning that it will become a capital asset. So tax implications on conversion of preference shares into equity shares. This we are seeing quite frequently, that preference shares are converted into equity shares. So as I said, there is a section 47. So for a transaction to occur a capital gains, it should be two things. It should be a capital asset, and second is it should be a transfer. So section 47 says the transactions which are not regarded as transfer. So under one of the such sections, which is section 47(10)(b), conversion of preference shares of a company into equity shares of that company shall not be treated as transfer, and thus the capital gain shall not arise. So on such conversion, there is no capital gains applicable on such transactions. But however, we need to see the period of holding, because once it's converted into equity shares, we need to determine the period of holding for that. And for that purpose, the period of holding would be taken as the same from the inception of the holding of preference shares, which means to say that from the time you held the preference shares and up to the date of conversion, that period will also be counted for the purpose of classifying it whether it is a long-term asset or whether it's a short-term asset. And then what about the cost? In case of conversion, there is no such consideration involved. So in such cases, what would happen is that whatever is the cost prior to the conversion will remain the same for the purpose of equity shares. So that means to say that the cost will get carried over for the purpose of equity shares. And then the indexation benefit will be available from the time the preference share was made. So that means to say that in case of unlisted shares, the indexation benefit will be from the inception of preference shares. And in case it is getting listed, there is separate provisions for that. And whatever is the difference between the equity shares and the subscription price paid for the preference shares, that will get taxed under 56(2)(10) if it comes across. For example, the market value of equity shares at the time of conversion is higher than the preference shares conversion rate. Then that amount of differential will attract 56(2)(10), which means to say that it will be taxed as income from other sources. And whatever the market value will be, that will be considered as the cost going forward. Then tax implications in case of for derivatives. Although we have heard that derivatives are securities, but it is clearly there is a quick requirement for a classification as to whether FNO, that is derivatives, would fall under capital asset or whether it would fall under business income. So wherever it is a capital asset, it would be at the rates applicable. So generally, the tenure of derivatives would determine whether what is the holding period for it and whether it is as short term or as long term. Then India majorly has a lot of trading in futures and options. So which means to say that futures and options, if you are trading frequently, there are high chances that the officer will litigate and treat it as business income instead of capital gains. So derivative transaction, although is not covered under speculation income, which is quite common misconception among the assessees, that derivative income is treated as speculative, but it is not. It is excluded from speculative definition. There's a definition for speculative wherein transactions in derivative is excluded from the definition. So based on that, it has only two heads, that is business income and the capital gains. So we need to analyze how the assessee is trading in FNO. If he is very frequent, if the volume of transaction is large, then we need to determine whether it was his actual business income or is it capital gains, because accordingly the differential rates would apply in case of capital gains, whereas in case of business income the regular rates would apply. So even that is very important to be looked at, and almost always it is treated as business income. But then again we need to look at whether the frequency is quite higher than normal. In such cases, we need to determine whether it's business or capital gains. However, in case of foreign institutional investors, there has been a judgment wherein it has been said that derivative transactions, the dealing in derivative transactions, will be treated as capital gains and not as business. So in such cases, we do not need to worry for foreign institutional investors that capital gains will that income will always be treated as capital gains, whether depending on short term or long term, depending on the holding tenure. So tax implications on AIFs. AIFs are popular means wherein now it's gaining a lot of momentum, be it REIT, be it venture funds, be it various infrastructure funds. So the SEBI has stepped in and clarified as to there will be three types of categories of AIFs. So AIF category 1, AIF category 2, AIF category 3. So each category has its different taxation. These all are forming under a business trust or as investment trust, and accordingly taxation is determined for. So for example, category 1 and category 2 is treated as a pass-through, given a pass-through status. So wherein whatever is the income will be taxed in the individual hands of assessee. It will not be taxed in the trust, business trust or the investment trust which is formed, and it is a pass-through. So that means to say that assessee, while calculating his taxes, has to include these income in his taxation. Also, one of the good practice done by these AIFs is that wherever they generate income, they pay taxes on behalf of the assessees. They remit by themselves, and they share the challans and all to the assessee to ensure that they are able to claim the tax credits. So there is something good practice which is being done by AIFs, so that the assessees who invest in these categories of funds do not have to pay interest on the advance tax, default of advance tax. And majorly there might be two sources of income. One would be capital gains income or else income from other sources. So there's something called as Form 64, and there are certain Form 64C and Form 64D, wherein AIFs provide that form to the assessee so that while calculating his tax returns and while filing his tax returns, the amount is included in his tax returns for purpose of tax filing. Okay. And such person has to include it, and the tax credits whatever AIFs pays can be claimed as credits. However, only category 3 is not treated as pass-through. So what does it mean? It means that the taxes are paid by the business trust or the investment trust by themselves. That is category 3 AIFs. They pay the taxes by themselves, and then it is an exempt income for the assessee. So that income has to be included in tax returns. So there has been a finance bill 2019 where it was proposed to allow losses incurred by such AIFs for pass-through to investors to be able to carry forward. Although there's no more movement, but it is definitely in the chapters to come that they will allow that losses, because AIF 3 will not be able to utilize unless there are more investments flowing in.
Just to add on, in case of category AF3, yes, it's exempt in the hands of assessee because the trust pays the taxes and all. When it comes to scrutiny, normally the officer will go with the proper documents. If we don't have supporting says, yes, the trust has paid the taxes in the hands of assessee, it's not taxable. So those kind of documents are very important. Recently, we noticed that still we need to show this income as exempt. But the moment we show it as an exempt, they will come back and ask why it's exempt, on what basis. If we don't have proper supporting, the chances are there that they may add back as an income. So we need to ensure that we have the proper document to show it as exempt. One more thing for 1 and 2, normally similarly like of the TMS, here also we would have spent some expenses, say management fees, managing that funds and all, or some other expenses. Yes, still we can claim those expenses based on the Sudhamurthy case law here also. Just we need to ensure that if there is a dividend income, no, we cannot claim any expenses against dividend income. So proportionately, we have to disallow relating to dividend income. Only we can claim against interest income or capital gains.
Yes. So I have one question here from Shantiraj Kini. So how to find FME of a share, say Wipro held long term as of 31st January 2018, which reckoner? Also, how to get holding statement to fill the same in tax returns? Should we approach NSDL at the company as they are pre-demat period, also before conversion to demat? So first one is how to get the FMV of the shares. So you can get the FMV of the shares from the NSE websites. There is something called as Bhav copy, and you can select the date of the date for which you are looking for. For example, now you are looking for 31st Jan 2018. So you can go to NSE website and there you can search for Bhav copy. Also, there are reckoners available in the market wherein they are given the values as of 31st January 2018, which have to be considered for the grandfathering. Now coming to your second question, how to get the holding statement to fill in the tax returns. So if you are talking about filling in for the purpose of 112A, wherein you need to report transaction and script by script, so that you can get it from your NSDL statement itself, and you would be getting something called as ECAS. So ECAS statements would have the relevant details for the purpose of updating your tax returns. Alternative is if he's investing through some portfolio managers, now portfolio managers have systems in place to extract the relevant detail for tax filing purposes. So even that can be looked into. And as the company are pre-demat period. So now as per the recent SEBI guidelines, all the shares which for the listed companies have to be in demat format. So you will have the ISIN numbers and the other relevant details like the name of the company as per the ISIN standards and all that available there. So you can get either from demat or you can get it from your portfolio managers if it is being handled. So next is a tax implication for ESOPs. ESOPs being quite famous now. One of the key thing is that how is the taxation determined? As we all know, it is determined in 2 phases. First is on. Thank you. Okay. First is at the time of exercise as a perquisite, it would be taxed by the employer, and it will be taxed as perquisite, and the value at which it is taxed. For example, it will be a fair market value. So that value will be considered as your cost. And then when you sell that shares which have been vested to you, when you sell, it will trigger a capital gains. So what will be the holding period? It will be the period from the vested period when it comes to you, when the shares are eligible for you. And from that time, till the date on which the shares are sold in the open market. That will be the holding period. And what will be the capital gains? The capital gains will be the sale price and the FMV which was taxed at the time of exercise, which was the difference between the FMV and whatever money you would have paid as your subscription amount would be treated as perquisites. So that after including that, your cost would go up, and the difference between sale price and the FMV will be treated as capital gains. And determining capital gains, whether it's short term or long term, we'll look at the period from which it vested to him and it has come to his account till the date he has sold. So if it is unlisted, again we come back to 2 years. 2 years for determining whether it's long term or short term. And in case it is a listed company, we look at whether it's 1 year. So whether if it's 12 months rather. So the income tax defines it by the way of months. So it is 12 months or 24 months. So tax impact on subsequent listings. So what would happen in such cases of startups and all would be that the shares would have been subscribed or would have got vested to you when it was not listed in stock markets, and then subsequently you would have not paid a securities transaction tax as well, because securities transaction tax is applicable only on shares which are there for the stock listed market. And then what would happen is post the shares have come to you, the company would have planned its operations, and then over a period of certain time it would go for listing. So based on that, we would look at whether the company is listed at the point when you are selling the shares. So there comes a time post listing of the company in stock exchange, the shares would any share which is listed on stock exchange would either attract securities transaction tax on purchase or sale in the stock exchange. But when you have got the shares, that time it would so happen that you would have not paid STT. And one of the criteria for section 112A, which is for stock listed securities, says that securities transaction tax must be paid in case of a long-term capital asset, which is in the nature of equity shares. So on acquisition, as well as transfer. So there are two things. When you acquire the shares, you need to pay securities transaction tax, and when you sell the shares, you need to pay securities transaction tax. So when we look at this situation, when you acquire the shares, the company was unlisted. So there, what would have happened is you would have not paid securities transaction tax. So in such cases, it would so happen that the definition of section 112A would not be clear enough for you to claim the preferential tax rate of 10%. In such, so then what has happened is CBDT in 2018 by way of notification number 60 has clarified that there are these lists of transactions on which you will be allowed at preferential rate of taxes under section 112A. So one of the transactions which includes is the listing of stocks on the stock market, and the shares were acquired prior to listing. So these will be on par with the listed securities, and you would get the stock treatment for 112A. So this is something which is a very popular question asked in income tax scrutinies for startups or any of such stocks which are sold, which are not listed on the date you acquired, but when you sold it subsequently, it was listed on the stock market, and your auditor or your tax consultant would have treated it as 112A because you would have seen it from the stock market. But then the question would come as to whether did you pay STT at the time of acquisition? The answer would be no. So this transaction is included in notification number 60 of 2018 issued by CBDT chairman, and it clearly specifies that such transactions will be treated as listed transaction, and the exemption of 112A, which is basically at the rate of 10%, you will get the preferential tax rate will be allowed. So crypto taxation, cryptocurrencies, which is something, as I said, is acquiring a lot of popularity now. And what is the definition? So most of the countries, be it UK, US, and Mauritius or the Saudi Arabias, they are all treating it as property. They have come to a conclusion saying that it will be treated as property, that is an asset. So US has given guidelines by Notice 2014 of 21, wherein it has given the guidelines saying that it will be treated as property for the purpose of taxation, which means to say that it will attract capital gains. And then we have UK, which has given the guideline for cryptocurrencies. So even there, they have given the guidelines as to when will it get taxed, when will the tax get triggered, and they have given it as treatment as similar to any property or an asset, which is as good as a listed asset or a security. So that is how the treatment is going around the globe. Now, when it comes to India, as CBDT chairman has commented that it will be asset. Although we do not have any firm saying that whether on the law, in the law, wherein it says that these kind of these kind of securities are still as a capital asset, but still, based on, as I said, based on this comment, we will be treating it as asset, and although it will not be treated at par with real currency, so which means to say that it will be treated as security and not as money, because money, exchange of money is excluded from the capital gains definition, which doesn't fall in the capital gains definition. So that means to say that this will be treated as asset and taxation will be arrived accordingly. That means to say that if it is less than 3 years, it would go as short-term capital asset, which will be taxed at slab rates. If it is more than 3 years, then taxation will be at 20% with indexation benefits. So broadly, this is what it says as broad taxation. Gains from cryptos held as investments, it will be treated as capital gains. So if you are holding investments in Bitcoin or the other coins, there are so many coins and these are all listed on the crypto exchanges. So any buy or sell of that, if you hold it for the purpose of investment, it will be treated as capital gains. And if you are doing into crypto trading, that means to say that you are buying and selling on a frequent basis, then it would be treated as business income. And crypto received from mining are services. For example, there are people who get into mining, or people who get into have set up their systems for mining bitcoins, for mining various other cryptocurrencies. For that, it will be treated as regular income, meaning to say that it will be a business income. And then there would be crypto received on airdrops, when airdrops is a regular income, which means to say that cryptos, when you receive as a bulk or as a part of some competition or so, then you would get it would be treated as business income. So taxation of investment in tax vehicles. So tax vehicles outside India. So what happens is there are many Indians who are looking at investments outside India. So it would be like a partnership firm, it would be like a corporate, LLP, LLC. So there are outside India, there are like two popular vehicles, which are limited partnerships and limited liability corporations. So it would go like this. So limited partnerships are basically have a structure of as good as a partnership firm. But then when it comes to looking at the finer details of partnership firm, there are certain mutuality concepts which are not satisfied by LPs. And when it comes to limited liability corporations, these are corporations listed outside India. It may be listed or it may not be listed. So what would happen is SSE sitting in India would be investing in LPs or LLCs outside India, and these LPs or LLCs would in turn be investing in corporates or the startups outside India. So this would be an investment vehicle, mainly an investment vehicle. So there would be a question as to how these tax treatments are done. So investments in LPs are considered as association of person. So it would mean that investments in LPs are taken as association of person, which means to say that the taxation will be as good as the income as received in the hands of the assessee. And how do we get to know? In case of US, there is a form called as Form K1, which is a form issued by the investing investee company, which means to say that LP or LLC, they would issue this form, and then this form, in this form, there will be different heads. For example, short-term capital gains, long-term capital gains, interest, and there will be dividend income, which would be in the hands of the, it should be in the hands of the LP, and that income is taken into the taxation of the individual. That means to say that now, if it is a short-term capital gains, you treat it as short-term capital gains in your tax returns. But outside India, the classification of short-term and long-term may vary. For example, some countries may take more than 2 years as long-term, whereas in India that would be considered less than 1 year. Or else outside India, it is less than 1 year. It is more than 1 year for the purpose of computing as long-term. But since these shares are not listed in Indian stock exchanges, then that would be considered as the period would be considered as 2 years, which means to say 24 months. In such cases, we need to look at whether that is long-term or short-term. And then the incomes as appearing in the head K1s would be taken as it is from the K1 and will be offered into the your tax returns in the respective heads. For example, if it is business income, it will be shown under business income. If it is capital gains, it will be shown under the respective long-term or short-term capital gains. Then when it comes to investment in LLCs are like body corporates incorporated outside India. So what would happen in such cases is that body corporates would be investing in other companies. And when it comes to other companies, it would have to, it would make dividends and it would pay out some capital back to the investors based on the improvements, based on the performance of the investments made. So distributions from LLC would be characterized as dividend and shall be taxable on accrual basis in the year of allocation. That would depend only whether there is a profit or not. So even though there may not be an actual withdrawal by the member, but there might be a distribution. So in such cases, we need to see whether it is a profit, it is a profit-making distribution, or was it from a loss. So if it's from a profit-making distribution, then it would be treated mainly as dividend. Okay, and then apart from that, there might be cases where you would be getting capital repayment. So it would be treated as capital reduction in your account. So K1s have specific heads wherein it would show that your investment interest has reduced from 25 to 23%. That means to say that for your 2% of investment which has reduced, you have got back your distributions. So in such cases, it would be treated as capital reduction and it will be deemed as dividend to the extent of accumulated profits, and the balance amount will be treated as capital gains. So yes, that is where. And second is, it would so happen that these companies would be buying back your shares and would issue and would give you the consideration. So in such cases, it will be treated as straightforward as buyback of income, buyback income, which will be considered as capital gains depending on the holding period.
Just to add on, normally in these cases, what happens, we used to get the K1 and all based on the calendar year. It will be covered for Jan to December. So in India, we need to declare from April to March. So we need to see how we have to show that income in the Indian tax return. And also we need to look into, because all these things will be in the foreign currency. So we may have to apply rule 115 and we need to see how we have to convert to INR and declare in the Indian tax return. Say example, in case of capital gain, we may have to consider previous month end rate that based on the SBI TT rate. So we may have to apply that and we have to convert it into INR, we have to report it. Similarly, we may have to look into the issue on foreign tax credit for those income which we are declaring in Indian tax return, these capital gains.
So I would like to take a 5-minute break here and would be back in 5 minutes. Requesting sir, if we can take a break of 5 minutes for you.
Yeah, you can take.
Thank you, sir. So, can I start, sir? Can I resume?
Yeah, please start. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So just again a small disclaimer. So the thing that had happened is we had got a very short period to prepare. So the previous PPT that I had prepared was at the end of its content. So then I had to quickly pull up one more PPT which I had prepared for another discussion which we had somewhere else, and this is what I am presenting to you right now. So again, mainly the discussion now for the next 40 to 15 minutes would be on the majorly the issues which come up, or the challenges which come up in while looking into the tax transactions, or else how the department treats them, or how is it that it gets into a litigation, any transaction. As we know, capital gains transactions are frequently, very frequently into litigations, and then how to overcome such things, or how to be prepared, or how to keep your clients aware of how to overcome such kind of challenges. So mainly what would happen is, in case of short-term capital gains, there is not much benefits available, as in terms of reduction in capital gains. Then you would have it at, although the tax rate is at 15%. So in what would have happened is, there is something called as beneficial tax rates, wherein the losses from the higher tax rates, or rather losses from lower tax rates, are utilized to knock off gains from higher tax rates. So this is something which is kind of a new area, but still it is being litigated by department. What would happen is tax gains which would attract taxes at lower rates. So you would have losses in that as well. So let's say you have losses under section 111A, which is at 15%, but you have gains under unlisted securities, which is at 20%, which is a long-term gain. Then what is possible is, you can utilize the loss from 111A and use it to knock off against the gains of 112, which is at 20%. So there you are able to save the, let's say, the 5% tax. You are able to reduce the tax to the extent of 5%. So in such cases, what would happen is, although it is possible on paper, but when it comes to the utility, or the schema which is issued by department, many times we have seen that sometimes it doesn't accept. So or else subsequently there's a 143(1) adjustment notice. So you need to look out for that as well. If you're planning to use such scheme, you should be able to substantiate it either in case of scrutiny, or while submitting response to 143(1)(a). So this is one of the possibilities. Then another is 112(a). Long-term capital gains, mainly arising on unlisted securities. Officer would many times ask on how the valuation has arrived at, or he would look at whether the assessee was investing, whether he was a resident or non-resident. Why would he be looking at? To see whether angel taxation applies for the company. So wherever a company raises fund at premium from a non-resident, 56 to 7B, which is angel taxation, doesn't apply. But for that also we need to be careful. We should have sufficient documentation to ensure that the person investing, that is the non-resident, does not have any has a proper tax residency certificate of the other country in which he is residing, and where there are less chances that he doesn't have that. It would be a high risk area, wherein the officer may treat it as a angel investment, and would treat it under taxation under section 56 to 7B, and tax would apply for that. So
just to add on, in case of sale of unlisted shares, certain instances where we notice that there is called some deferment of sale consideration. The seller would have received maybe 70-80% at the time of transfer. The balance 20-30% it may come based on certain conditions. That will be, if they met it, they may receive the sale consideration after 2 years or 3 years. So we may have to look into that also when we need to consider that for as a capital gain. So it's a gray area that when we need to consider, but based on the act, it says that whether it's not on receipt basis, it's an accrual basis, still we need to consider at the time of transfer of shares, not on the basis of receipt. So that is one thing. Apart that, some cases what we notice, there would be not sale of shares, there is a sale of business. So chances are there if the promoters sold the company, the tax authorities may say that few cases if we don't have proper documents, it's the sale of business, so it will be treated as a business income, not as a capital gain. So better we should have proper supporting documents in case of sale of any unlisted shares.
Also, along with proper documentation, we should have proper supporting for the valuation at which it was sold. Because subsequently, when the assessment would have got into action, that time the officer would have got the real picture of the valuation, and then he would question as to whether this valuation was done rightly or not. And then although these valuations cannot be questioned because it is done by professionals and it has been done under professional standards. But still, there are circumstances where the officer rejects the valuation or refers it to another valuer, and the valuation may go different. And then there would be a tax impact, and that tax impact would not be while concluding the assessment, but it would be from the date on which the transaction was incurred. So this is something which has to be taken care of, and sufficient supporting documents, sufficient substantiating reasoning has to be put forth, and we need to look at how we can overcome such kind of questions. I have a few questions from the participants over here. In case of capital gains earned through PMS, can expenses incurred by PMS towards management fee, brokerage, audit fee, and custody charges can be claimed as deduction from net sale consideration? So if you are talking from the point of view of the investor, that is the primary investor who has invested in PMS, yes, as I said in my previous slides, it was allowed by virtue of the ITAT in Bangalore. ITAT, they had given a decision in case of Madam Narayan Murthy. So there we had got the ability to take the exemption. But however, although Mr. Kiran has already said this, that we need to be aware that this is still a gray area. Although we claim the deduction, it may so happen that the officer may disallow. But subsequently, if it goes for litigation, the penalty provisions would not attract because there's already a precedence to it. There's a case law supporting it, as some way or the other, it is able to lead to this conclusion that PMS expenses are allowed as deduction. I hope that answers. And in case if you are talking from portfolio management system company, then in that case, yes, it would be allowed for them wherever they are incurring, and that is not being passed on to the investors. So second question is, while disclosing investments in listed securities under AL, that is assets and liabilities in ITR, whether cost value of investment to be disclosed or market value to be disclosed? Kiran sir?
Always all assets and liabilities we should declare only at cost value.
So it's clear saying that these assets and liabilities have to be disclosed as at the cost value only. In case where you disclose at fair market value, the fluctuations will happen quite frequently. Although it may so happen that you have not sold even a single share, but the value would have gone down. Then the officer can treat it as transfer and basically tell that you are not disclosed the capital gains transaction. And this is something which has happened in real life as well. That officer has, because of the fluctuation in assets and liabilities, although there was no transfer, because there was a difference in the two comparative years in the schedule AL, officer has treated it as capital gains. Although at the end, we still got a favorable order, still this is something which has to be looked at and has to be kept in mind while filling up schedule AL, that it should be always filled at cost. There is one more question. Trading in cryptocurrency since treated as business income, whether 44 AD will be applicable. Sir?
Yes, as explained by you, the trading in crypto still we are treating it as a capital gain. So we are not showing it as a business. Since we are not showing it as a business, no, we cannot claim 44 AD. But still, if you want to show it as a business, 44 AD, we need to meet certain conditions that we should be careful on the, because of that, it says only 8% we need to declare, but whatever that different this thing, so it may be very, very litigating.
Yes. So trading in cryptocurrencies, it would be such that it is, since CBD chairman has said it is an asset, we are going to go by capital gains unless we are doing mining. Mining activities would be under business income and it would be treated as regular income. Apart from that, if it's trading purely in cryptocurrencies, it would go still by capital gains.
Correct.
So some implications on listed equity shares. So if purchase and sale had happened before 31st January 2018, it would have been exempt under the section 1038. And purchase happened after 31st January 2018, but sold between January to April 2018, which is before the by the end of financial year 2018. Then it would still be exempted under section 1038. And whereas it has been purchased before 31st January 2018 and sold after 1st January 2018, it would long-term capital gains would be taxable, and it would be grandfathering rule would apply, which means to say that whatever are the gains up to 31st January 2018, that would be treated as not taxable, and only the capital gains will be calculated between the difference of fair market value and the actual sale consideration. If the actual sale consideration is less than fair market value but more than cost, then you will not get losses. You cannot incur losses. It would be treated as grandfathered income and that would not get taxed. So it goes by three phases. If the sale consideration is more than fair market value as on 31st January 2018, then but lower than the cost actually incurred, only in such circumstances you have actually incurred a capital erosion. So there you would be allowed as capital losses. But in any other cases where you are falling either between fair market value, that is grandfathered value, or more than grandfathered value, in such circumstances you will not be able to claim losses. Only gains are grandfathered exempt income. So if it is unlisted shares, as I said, it is 20% with indexation, and if it is short term, it is at normal slab rates. And as I said, in case of non-resident or foreign companies, 10% LDCG without giving the indexation benefits. Now, also when you are incurring capital gains on sale of any foreign assets, there is rule 115 we need to take care of, because the conversion rule applies, because the transaction that you are incurring in would be in global currency. So let's say you are incurring a sale in the month of October. So then for the conversion purpose, you take the rates for the conversion of previous month end, which is September end. And that too, it would be SBI TT rates. Here we need to pay attention that it is not RBI rates. It is SBI TT buying rates. Why? Because it is to be taken off previous month. This is being prescribed in rule 115. So TT rates of September 30th has to be taken for the month of October transactions. This applies only in case of sale of foreign assets, wherein you need to convert the rates and bring it into India. So in case of debenture and debenture oriented funds, it is, as I already said, it is 12 months, 36 months majorly for all the debenture funds, and it starts at 20% without indexation. And in case of debenture mutual funds, it is 10% without indexation and 20% with indexation. Whichever is lower and beneficial to the SEC, you can opt for that. Then in case of derivatives, AIFs, ESOPs, buyback. So buybacks, basically what would so happen is, in case of buyback of shares, it would be treated as income in the hands of company as per QA. Domestic company shall pay tax at the rate of 23, which would have been DDT, which is now not there. And distributed income, that is buyback price minus issue price. On that only it would be treated as distributed income. In hands of shareholders, it would be exempted because it was under 1034A, but by recent provisions, it doesn't look like it will be exempt. It may come still as taxable because it will be taxed as capital gains in the hands of the shareholders. So broadly, these are the ones. There are few case studies are the real life circumstances which Mr. Kiran would like to share on the year based on our past experiences.
So just one thing need to add on. There is one thing called, there is a stock appreciation right. So few cases employee will get it from the employer. So we need to see how it has to be taxed in the hands of employee. Whether it's a capital gain, whether it is a perquisite. So that is very important. So based on our understanding, so it's a right, he will get it from that stock appreciation. So that will be considered as a capital gain and not as a perquisite or salary income. So when he transfer the right or the liquidate that, he will need to declare it as a capital gain income. So that is one thing.
Also, one of the cases wherein I mentioned, even rights attract capital gains. So when you are endorsing rights, that time you attract capital gains. But then question comes as to how do you value the rights and how will be the tax treatment and how will you arrive at sale consideration, the cost, etc. for the right. So there has been various pros and cons to this. But then when it comes to capital gains taxation for rights, this is what, in my opinion, it would come as that there's a section called as 50C, so which talks about where you are not able to, find the value of the rights, you will of any capital asset. Then the value would be treated as same as that of the consideration is given. Now, let's say you have given up a right for one asset and are acquiring right in another asset. So then either of it, one would have the value and the other would not have the value. The asset that you are holding would not have, you will not be able to determine the value. In such circumstances, for the purpose of valuation, what would be the value for offering to capital gains? The value as per this section would more or less be the value in which the asset which is coming in. So it's not the asset which is going on and rather the asset which is coming in. So that would be the value, and for the purpose of capital gains treatment, it would go by the rule of normal unlisted shares, and not even normal, it would be at 36 months, wherein it would say that if it's more than 36 months, it would be as long term, where it's less than 36 months, it would be as short term. And tax rates would apply accordingly, which is slab rates in case of short term and 20% in case of long term. So this is one.
And in case of, say, example, RSU, ESOP, sometimes what happened, the assessee would have residing outside India, he would have got allotted RSU, ESOP of the foreign country, foreign employer. When he moved to India, after a few years, he may become a resident. So few cases we may have to look into how we need to tax those RSU, ESOP when it got allotted when he was residing outside India. Maybe we may have to see based on the proportion or whether when it got allotted, that after he moved to India or whether when he was outside India. So those cases are very important in those cases, how we need to declare the capital gain.
Also, in one of the cases, what has happened is it is a exemption. The assessee had sold a residential property and acquired another residential property. However, the period during which it was acquired, it was just missed by 15 to 20 days or so. So, basis this, the officer has completely withdrawn such exemption, saying that it is major amount was paid prior to the due date cutoff period, but then the registration and the possession was handed over after the cutoff period. However, there are various judicial case laws wherein it says that where the consideration is paid and there's no default by the buyer in terms of getting the possession, but it is by the default of the constructor, that is the builder or the person who is handing it over. In such circumstances, the exemption cannot be withdrawn. It will cause an unwanted hardship to the buyer. So in such circumstances, we have seen several places where they have allowed such benefits to the buyer and have allowed the benefit of claiming the capital gains exemption under 54 or 54F, even though there's a slight delay because of the uncontrollable circumstances by the buyer. So this is something, there's one case law by the name Sanjeev Lal. It's a Supreme Court case law wherein it has been allowed. So this is something which can be explored wherever the due date has been missed by certain period.
Yes, just to add on, if at all, because all of us are facing this COVID from last 1.5 years, maybe a few cases we would have put money into capital gain account scheme, but the due date are coming very near, so still if we are not able to complete or if we are not able to utilize, we may have to go for some getting approval from the CBDT or something, further extension or something, so that we are not losing the benefit of 54, etc.
Yeah. And recently CBDT has come up with a notification which allows even if you have incurred a capital gains and you are planning to park your money in capital gains account scheme, the period should have been before the end of September, July in case of a non-tax audit client, and before the end of September, October in case of audit client. That has been extended by 6 months. So basically, you can invest in capital gains account scheme, or you can invest in the real estate by the end of December. So you have time period till that. Even that can be looked for if you have missed any such window. So there's a recent notification which we can share it with ICAI branch for everyone's attention. Okay. So this is what we had, and thank you again for staying patient with us. And although I understand it was a short time in which we had to prepare, but it was a nice having to speak in front of my alma mater. Thank you all. Kiran sir, would you like to add anything?
Yes, thank you all. It was very nice session. Just to add on one query on that 44AD, if at all, if you show it as a business income, what happened? If you refer to section 69, sometimes what happened, assume that you gain maybe 50, you are declaring only 8%. The difference, there is called, we need to prove that what is if you are going to invest in somewhere, there is called source of fund. If you don't prove that source, if it's a tax paid money, if it's not tax paid, then they may add it as an income. So that we should be careful on that when we are applying 44AD wherever.
You have answered all the Q&A? There are 5-6 questions. I think you have answered,
sir,
no?
we covered, sir.
Okay, so you just check directly. Some people send the query to you only. Maybe there, just check. This Attibele is outside 8
Answered, sir.
kilometer. That answered already, no?
Yes, sir, it's answered. We need to check further this thing, that what is the population and all, we need to check.
Yeah, okay, fine. I think otherwise done. So you answered everything. Thank you. We had a fabulous session from Chirag and Kiran. Thank you very much. Even with a very short notice, you made it possible and imparted your knowledge. On behalf of Bangalore branch, our wholehearted thanks to both of you. Thank you very much. Divya, are you there? I think we are missing Divya. Thank you, participants. Your active participation made this program a successful one. Once again, my humble request for the contribution of CABF life membership, just rupees 10,000. Please become a life member of CABF Chartered Accountants Benevolent Fund. bangaloreici.org. In the website, we have created a special link for that. Please contribute 10,000 rupees so that you can become a life member of that. It will really help the needy. Thank you very much once again. See you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye. Happy Diwali to each one of you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Happy Diwali.
Happy
Happy
Diwali.
Diwali to you too, sir.
Kiran, and all
Thank
the
you, sir.
participants, to all the members and your family members. Very, very happy Diwali. Prosperous and enjoy the holidays. Thank you. See you all.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.